The role of neurotransmitters was emphasized in eliciting EPSP's excitatory postsynaptic potentials and IPSP's inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. However, certain chemical messengers elicit complex responses that cannot be described as simply EPSPs or IPSPs. The word modulation is used for these complex responses, and the messengers that cause them are called neuromodulators. The distinctions between neuromodulators and neurotransmitters are not always clear. In fact, certain neuromodulators are often synthesized by the presynaptic cell and correlate with the neurotransmitter. Neuromodulators often modify the postsynaptic cell's response to specific neurotransmitters, amplifying or dampening the effectiveness of the ongoing synaptic activity. Alternatively, they may change the presynaptic cell synthesis, release, reuptake, or metabolism of a transmitter. In other words, they alter the effectiveness of the synapse. In general, the receptors for neurotransmitters influence ion channels that directly affect the excitation or inhibition of the postsynaptic cell. These mechanisms operate within milliseconds. Receptors for neuromodulators, on the other hand, more often bring about changes in metabolic processes in neurons, often via G proteins coupled to second messenger systems. Such changes, which can occur over minutes, hours, or even days, include alterations in enzyme activity or through influences on DNA transcription in protein synthesis. Thus, neurotransmitters are involved in rapid communication, whereas neuromodulators tend to be associated with slower events such as learning, development, and motivational states. The best-known neuromodulators are also neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, histamine, and norepinephrine.
Chemicals known to be neuromodulators. Dopamine. There are two types of dopaminergic receptors, called the D1 and the D2. The former catalyzes the synthesis of CAMP, and the latter inhibits its synthesis. These reactions then regulate calcium and potassium channels in the postsynaptic membrane. Acetylcholine is a major neuromodulator in the PNS at the neuromuscular junction in the brain. After it is released and activates receptors on the postsynaptic membrane, the concentration of ACH at the postsynaptic membrane decreases, thereby stopping receptor activation due to the action of the enzyme acetylcholinesterase. Histamine is produced by neurons of the hypothalamus, cells of the stomach mucosa, mast cells, and basophils in the blood. In the central nervous system, it is important for wakefulness, blood pressure, pain, and sexual behavior. In the stomach, it increases acidity. It is involved primarily in the inflammatory response, as well as a range of other functions such as vasodilation and regulation of the immune response to foreign bodies. Norepinephrine, also known as noradrenaline, is produced by the brainstem, hypothalamus, and adrenal glands and released into the bloodstream. In the brain, it increases the level of alertness and wakefulness. Serotonin is produced from tryptophan, an essential amino acid. Its effects generally have a slow onset, indicating that it works as a neuromodulator. In general, serotonin has an excitatory effect on pathways that are involved in the control of muscles and an inhibitory effect on pathways that mediate sensations. The activity of serotonergic neuron is lowest or absent during sleep and highest during states of alert wakefulness. In addition to their contributions to motor activity and sleep, serotonergic pathways also function in the regulation of food intake, reproductive behavior, and emotional states such as mood and anxiety. Lipids. A number of membrane phospholipid-derived substances are important in synaptic signaling, most commonly acting as neuromodulators. Cannabinoid receptors are found in a widespread location throughout the central and peripheral nervous systems in pathways regulating in a wide range of physiological functions including appetite, pain sensation, mood, memory, and locomotor activity. These receptors are the principal target of tetrahydrocannabinol, the principal physioactive constituent of plants in the cannabis genus. Disorders associated with neuromodulators. First, we have Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a neurodegenerative disorder characterized by learning and memory impairments. It is associated with a lack of acetylcholine in certain regions of the brain. Next, we have the depression. Depression is believed to be caused by the depletion of norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine in the central nervous system. Hence, pharmacological treatment of depression aims at increasing the concentration of these neurotransmitters in the central nervous system. Schizophrenia, which is a severe mental illness, has been shown to involve excessive amounts of dopamine in the frontal lobes, which leads to psychotic episodes in these patients. The drugs that block dopamine are used to help schizophrenic conditions. Lastly, we have Parkinson's disease. The destruction of Substantia nigra leads to the destruction of the only central nervous system source of dopamine. Dopamine depletion leads to uncontrollable muscle tremors seen in patients suffering from Parkinson's disease.
I'm telling you that is not Coke.
Well, it sure tastes like Coke.
Well, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Oh, stupid, it is not.
Yeah, how do you know I'm stupid? I'm not stupid.
I can
Do look
read,
stupid?
I can
It
read.
is.
You're giving me a headache. If you two can't get along, I'm going to make you eat dirt. And you'll have to wear the onion sombrero all day long. Senor. Real Coke taste. Zero sugar.
For the highlight of this topic, I'm going to discuss the article Brain Chemical Helps Signal to Neurons When to Start a Movement, which talks about the study of neuroscientists led by John Assad at Harvard Medical School in neuromodulators, particularly dopamine. Dopamine is commonly known as one of the brain's neurotransmitters, but in the new research, dopamine is acting as a neuromodulator. The new paper is one of the latest results to expand our knowledge of the crucial and varied roles that neuromodulators play in the brain. First is modulating movement. To identify what contributes to the sudden decision of when to move, Assad and his colleagues trained mice to recognize that a licking movement would bring them a juice reward, but only if they timed the lick to occur between 3 and 7 seconds after a cue from a paired tone and flash of light. The mice therefore had a flexible window of time in which they could decide to move at any instant. The timing of their movement consequently varied widely across trials. But whenever the movement occurred, the researchers found that it followed almost immediately after the rising level of dopamine in the fluid-filled space around neurons seemed to reach a certain threshold. When dopamine rose very quickly, the movement happened early in the response period. When dopamine rose slowly, the movement happened later. Next is slowly shaping behavior. The powerful effects of neuromodulators mean that abnormal levels of these chemicals can lead to numerous human diseases and mood disorders. But within their optimal levels, neuromodulators are like secret puppeteers holding the strings of the brain, endlessly shaping circuits and shifting activity patterns into whatever may be most adaptive for the organism. And last is modulating the neuromodulators. Though Assad and colleagues studied only one neuromodulator at a time, the scientists emphasized that neuromodulators always work in tandem. Researchers are also looking at evidence that some neuromodulators modulate one another. For example, endocannabinoids, the neuromodulators that bind to the same receptors as the active component in marijuana, seem to help keep the amount of neuromodulators released by individual neurons within an optimal range. For the relatedness of this topic to the Philippine context, I'm going to discuss the research article Mental Health and Well-Being of Children in the Philippine Setting during the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the National Statistics Office, mental health illnesses rank as the third most common form of morbidity among Filipinos. In the assessment conducted on the Philippine mental health system, a prevalence of 16% of mental disorders among children was reported. With this alarming number of cases, it is surprising to see how the Philippines is currently responding to this problem. To date, there are only 5 government hospitals with psychiatric facilities for children, 84 general hospitals with psychiatric units, and 46 outpatient facilities, from which there are only 11 that are designated for children and adolescents. Additionally, there are only 60 child psychiatrists practicing in the Philippines, with the majority of them practicing in urban areas such as the National Capital Region. Hence, children with mental health problems who are in rural areas have less access to such services. As the pandemic continues, combined with the menace of the typhoon season, thousands of children are placed in a situation where the future is uncertain. A local study showed that youth-age students are among those with significant association with a greater psychological impact due to the pandemic. In addition, UNICEF also reports that children nowadays face a trifecta of threats, which include direct consequences of the disease itself, interruption in essential services, and increasing poverty and inequality. All of these can lead to higher incidences of stress, anxiety, and depression.